Hey everybody, in this video I want to talk to you about how to use quotes in your essays. And there are a couple of things we're going to look at. For the most part though, we're just going to look at two main paragraphs from my prospectus where I use quotes a lot. But before we get into that, I want to talk about how not to use quotes really quickly. Add a period there. How not to use quotes. You shouldn't use a quote just like unintroduced. This is the biggest mistake that I see most often is there'll be the start of a paragraph and there's bam, here's this quote from your source. And then you move on like, well, and there's the authority from which I derive all of what I am going to say, right? That's one big mistake that people make. You have to introduce your quote, and the way that well, there are a lot of ways to introduce a quote, but one of the ways you can do that is by talking about like leading up to it and saying like, "Hey, here's a problem that we have, and one of the people who's talked about it is this author, and she says blank, right?" And then you can refer back to that quote. So because she says that, we can then conclude blah blah, right? So you're having a conversation. It's that same thing with that classic style of writing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where it's like you're having a conversation with somebody, and it would be really awkward to just say a quote in the middle of a conversation to somebody you were talking to. It's just as awkward in a paper, right? So you don't want to do that. The other thing that you don't want to do, and this is something that I see a lot too, is use quotes out of context. So you see this a lot in really like shady yellow journalism and just like bad writing that's manipulative, where somebody will say something along the lines of, "This is not a movie you should go see." And then the quote will be, "A movie you should go see." And so you take it and make it mean literally the opposite of whatever it means. One of the things that I appreciate about the university education is that it's a liberal arts education and you study a lot of different stuff, because one of my favorite classes that I think helped me the most with writing and with thinking too is statistics. When you take statistics, you learn a lot about how they function and how complicated they are, and about R scores and things like that. But what you really learn, or what I really learned in a statistics class, was how you can really manipulate statistics to say almost anything in the same way that you can manipulate a quote to say almost anything. So by changing the scale that you're looking at, or by having a very small sample size, you can represent things that look very clear and very apparent that just aren't. And that's flat out dishonest. So sometimes if you're trying to make a point and you need a source to show like, oh, my point is a good point, you can go somewhere and just kind of quote mine it, where you look at it and you're looking for it to say literally anything that supports your argument. You take it out of context and then there it is. Please, please, please don't do that. Not only is it bad writing, it's also an ethical issue, because you're now attributing a sentiment to somebody that they don't have. When you misrepresent someone's language intentionally, you're saying this person said this thing that they may totally disagree with. So you owe it to the authors of the sources you're using to represent their thoughts, to represent their ideas as well as you can. Now, if you have a misunderstanding and you literally just read it in a way that it's not intended, that's okay, right? I don't think anybody would ever be like, you're a bad person for making a mistake. That's not what I'm saying. That happens to everybody. But don't do it out of laziness, like, oh, well, I just didn't bother reading the whole thing. Or out of convenience, well, it's not exactly representative, but it helps me. So don't do either of those things. So I'm going to read this whole paragraph right here, which is super, super quote heavy. Actually, I'm going to read these two paragraphs. Oh, wait, sorry. It's 3 paragraphs. No, just 2. We'll just do 2. So these 2 paragraphs, basically, I'm talking about an article that someone has written, and the article is some like 22, 23 pages, but I'm going to break down a summary and then break down the summary of the summary. So here it is. In her 1984 article, What Happens When Basic Writers Come to College, Bazell argues caution similarly to Liu. A series of theses give the overall shape of her argument. First, one approach sees basic writers' entry into college as precipitating a clash among dialects. In other words, the surface features of a language that change due to some kind of separation, class, distance, etc., are the contact zone that must be addressed. However, A second approach sees the problem of basic writers entering college as a clash not of dialects, but of discourse forms. The focus here is not mainly on features of language, such as forms of the verb to be, but on the features of text, such as verbal devices used to achieve coherence. This is more similar to Hirsch's view of language as cultural literacy, though Bezel does not, as Hirsch does, advocate for one discourse form over another. In addition to this position, Bezel notes, without outright endorsement one way or the other, that whereas many genres, like the many dialects of English, are equally capable of generating complex thoughts, they are not capable of generating the same complex thoughts. Next, it is a short step, then, from seeing basic writer's problem as a clash of discourse conventions to seeing it as a clash of ways of thinking. And finally, like any other language community, the academic community uses a preferred dialect, so-called Standard English, in a convention-bound discourse, academic discourse, that creates and organizes the knowledge that constitutes the community's worldview. Okay, paragraph 2. The shape of this argument, then, is that basic writers are called basic writers because they have different discourse forms, that is, different ways of making and organizing meaning that are not less valid, but do produce different outcomes which correspond to worldview. In adopting a new discourse form, a student will inherently adopt a new worldview, so success is not measured by how effectively an individual organizes or communicates an idea, but rather by how closely she adheres to the dominant worldview. In pursuing acceptance of her language, she will, as a result, distance herself from her worldview of nurture. So it comes as no surprise when Bezel concludes that the academic seeks to subsume other worldviews to which the student may retain allegiance. It appears like she is arguing that all instruction in LWC is inherently imperialistic and should therefore be abandoned, but she hedges near the end of the essay. This is why you read it out loud, people. Offering a potentially kinder interpretation. It could be argued, however, that the home worldview, especially if it is associated with a social group of relatively little power, has a better chance of surviving if some who hold allegiance to it are also sufficiently familiar with the academic worldview to wield power in the larger society. It's an article. Okay, that was embarrassing. Anyway, let's talk about the moves I made, because this incorporates a lot of quotes, and I would like to see you do this. So first of all, in this first paragraph, we've got 3 main points that she's making. We've got 1, we've got 2, and then we've got this middle section where we talk about how she gets from 2 to point 3, and then here's point 3, right? But it's really difficult, and it's taken a whole article and it's condensed it down into one paragraph, right? It's taken this big article, and there's lots of arguments for each of these points. So in her article, we have time to arrive at each point, and it's sort of explained. But for my purposes, I didn't have that amount of space, so it's crunched down into this one tiny little spot. Also note how I've got these words here that are the rhetorical signposting that's telling you which part of the essay that we're in. First, in other words, however, Bezel notes without outright endorsement one way or the other. So notes means without outright endorsement one way or the other. We're just pointing it out, right? We're not saying it's good or bad, but I wanted to reiterate that. Next, finally, there's a lot of arranging words in this to show where we are in that process, right? And each of the quotes is folded into a sentence where it's grammatically consistent. And finally, like any other language community, right? So all of those quotes are folded into these other sentences. I'm making pretty heavy use of the bracketed adjustment of a letter to make sure that I've got the right capitalization. So yeah, that's how I'm using quotes in this, but it's really complicated. So in the next paragraph, I reiterate what I just said, but I put it in my own words. Right? Now, I don't need an in-text citation when I'm doing this because I've just done all the citing for Bezel here and I'm about to cite Bezel afterwards. If I started here, if this is all I had, then I would need a citation for Bezel afterwards. Because if this is all that I have, it makes it look like my ideas if I'm just pitching this, right? So I need to show that it comes from Bezel. But I don't need to cite it because I said the shape of this argument then is, right? That's saying that I'm just talking about Bezel's argument. I'm reiterating. It's complicated, so we're saying it again in a slightly different way. Okay? We're saying it again in a slightly different way. Each point that we get to obtains its coherence and its meaning from the previous point. And so if you were to look at, if I were to just say, you know what, if you read What Happens When Basic Writers Come to College, it explains that this is the conclusion. That's not great, because that doesn't, first of all, not everybody's going to actually go read that article. In fact, most people won't. So we need to represent what she says, and we can do that really accurately through the use of quotes and these arranging words, right, and folding them into sentences, and then reiterating it here. When you use a quote, you need to, as best as you can, adhere to the author's original intent for that quote. 2, it's a good idea if you fold that quote into your own sentence. Let's see. And let's just look right here at the end. This relationship between my sentence and her sentence. It appears like she is arguing that all instruction in LWC, this is the language of wider communication, is inherently imperialistic and should therefore be abandoned. But she hedges near the end of the article, offering a potentially kinder interpretation. So this right here is a summary of where we were, and it's also a preview of what's about to happen. So based on everything that we just said, we could say that LWC instruction is inherently imperialistic, right? That's all of this up here can conclude here. But she hedges, not my hedging, she hedges near the end of the article, offering a potentially kinder interpretation of instruction in LWC. It could be argued, however, right? And so this quote right here explains how the teaching of the language of wider communication in the college classroom is not necessarily imperialistic, because it enables people to have access to power so that they can go out and then represent their otherwise unrepresented or underrepresented group, right? So that's just another interpretation, multiple interpretations of a single set of facts. Either way, the point here is not to say whether or not we agree with Bizel or not. The point is to look at how you can take a lot of quotes and fold them into your own writing, and it doesn't come across as, at least I hope it doesn't come across as not writing your own paper or relying too heavily on quotes, because you've done the work to arrange it in such a way that it appears to be coherent, right? You are representing something in a coherent way. You're placing the quotes in conversation with one another, and you're having a conversation with them. It feels relatively coherent all the way through. This is a far cry from just dropping a quote in and then walking on without introducing it, right? This is very deeply integrated into the text as I go through. So did I use a lot of quotes? Yes. Would it have been faster if I just wrote the paragraph out and then cited her at the end without using the quotes? 100%. But doing it this way shows that I have a good understanding of my source, that I've read throughout the entire thing, and that I've understood the overall arc of her argument and the various pieces, and that I've done the work to pull them out so that I can show that to my audience. That's a good way of using quotes to demonstrate mastery of material, and I hope that just staring at this screen for a long time will give you some tools for how to incorporate quotes into your own writing. Either way, you should use quotes in your papers. Yes, I do think that paraphrasing can be effective and summary can be effective. Absolutely, they're very good things to do. I also think that using quotes is a great way to keep your tone on track. Adapting those quotes to your own grammar is a great sort of sentence building exercise, and it keeps you in depth and ingrained in your sources, which is really good. You want to be in your sources as you're writing. You want to be having that relationship, having that conversation. All of that's very good. I hope you'll do it. I hope you won't just like copy and paste a paragraph in and be like, now I'm done, but instead that you'll take an approach like this, where you arrange the information with your own words, using rhetorical signposting, using explanation, and using your sentences to connect one idea to the other. I should note as well that my whole paper is not like this. It's not just a weaving of quotes. I'm in a literature review section here, and so later on it's a lot heavier on here's just me talking, and I think that'll be more indicative of your paper as well. You might have a section where you say here's a source and here's a source and here's a source, and they all say these things, and after you've said what they say, you can say, and I think that they're either right or wrong for this reason, and here are my thoughts. So it's not all going to look like this, definitely, but some of it can, and I hope that you'll include quotes effectively and meaningfully and contextually in your paper. Thanks, you guys. Stay safe and healthy. And please don't hesitate to email me if you need anything. I know that this has been a crazy, wild ride, moving everything online. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your grace and your patience and your willingness to work. And I hope that even though we're in this sort of long distance format, that you will feel very much supported by both the institution and by me throughout this whole process. If you don't, that's something that we need to address, so please let me know. If you're having any trouble with technology, you're having trouble getting assignments in, you're not sure how to do something, again, please let me know. And I've got a lot going on with this and with grading and, my own transition to the online thing. It's taken me a million years, and it's certainly, I'll admit, I kind of hate it. But if I don't, all that to say, if I don't get back to you really quickly on an email, it's totally appropriate, especially in a purely online environment, to just send me a follow-up email the next day and say like, hey, Grant, I emailed you this the other day. If you wouldn't mind getting back to me, I would appreciate it. That's totally fine to give me that little, kick in the backside reminder to get back to you if I've dropped the ball on something. Please don't hesitate to do that. Also, if you feel, if the social isolation gets a little too isolating, or if, you need some more like one-on-one help, we can make that happen in an online environment. We can do a Discord, set up to where we talk that way, or a WebEx meeting or something. We can make it happen. So please just let me know if you need any help. I won't be the one to reach out first because there's a bunch of you, and some of you probably don't either need or don't want my help with anything, and that's, again, fine. But if you do need help, please, it's not an imposition. Please, please, please do ask. All right, thank you so much, guys. There will be a Google form to fill out for this. There will be the last journal associated with this unit, Unit 13 as well. And then as far as journals go and Google Forms, you are done. The only things you'll have left are a major paper and then a revision of that paper. So we're getting close, and I am proud of you for the work that you have done. Thanks, and I'll see you around.